Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's session. My name is Carolyn Rogers, and we are excited to welcome you to our customer webinar on fortifying your setup, hardening your implementation against today's threats. We really want to equip you with everything you need to have the most secure implementation of Fireblocks as possible. So we're excited to have you here. A couple of housekeeping items before we dive in. Please feel free to ask questions throughout the session. We'll answer them live at the end of the session, so we encourage you to ask. And then also you'll receive the webinar recording via email after the session. So feel free to send it around to your colleagues, so you'll be receiving that afterwards. I'm excited to introduce our speakers today. We have a great lineup for you. First, we have Matan Moyal, technical CSM team lead at Fireblocks. We also have Ori Hershko, cyber threat intelligence research lead at Fireblocks. And then Slava Serebrianniy, he's director of global services at Fireblocks. So to give you a little sense of the agenda today, first we'll start with the evolving threat landscape, today's most concerning threat actors and vectors in the digital asset landscape, and what you need to be aware of. Second, hardening your implementation. So Matan will take you through common Fireblocks configurations and workflows where there could be vulnerabilities and how to ensure you have the most secure implementation possible. Then we'll go through key takeaways from Fireblocks security workshop offering and best practices from that. And then we'll wrap up with next steps that you can take and Q&A. So with that, we're going to dive into the evolving threat landscape, and I'm pleased to introduce Ori Hershko. Ori, come on stage with me. There we go. Take it away.
Thank you, Caroline. Hello, everybody. So really excited to talk today about the evolving threat landscape. And when we talk about the evolving threat landscape, we actually go over the threat actors that impose threat to Fireblocks customers, institutions, and everyone who's working in the crypto ecosystem, and the actual threats they are imposing. But first, let's understand why we have those threats. So in the next slide, you're able to see that digital assets are a gold mine for hackers. Since 2020, we have seen more than $17 billion stolen from institutions, companies, and individuals across the crypto landscape. In the past year, since 2025, we have additional billions stolen, and we can see that AI is a force multiplier, not only for the security personas, but also for hackers and attackers. They make use of it to increase the scale and the amount of stolen funds. It's not only the easiness of stealing so many assets through this ecosystem, it's the ability of different types of hackers from all across the globe to access computers, services from anywhere and steal funds that are just available to them through those institutions and services. In the next slide, we can see that what have changed in crypto is threat actors used to steal data. They would later sell that data and try to make money of it. That thing has changed. Today, threat actors target financial institutions, and every app in the digital asset landscape is a money-related or financial app. Once you manage to compromise it, you're able to steal funds. In the next slide, we can see the four major categories of threat actors that impose several attack vectors across the threat landscape. We have nation-state attackers. Those are backed by countries in order to fund the strategic national revenue goals. They employ complex attack and have vast amount of resources and a ready-made complex infrastructure that enables them to attack all kinds of institutions in month and maybe year-long attacks, compromising millions and billions of dollars. One of the most notable threat actors in that category is the Lazarus Group by North Korea, who managed to steal more than $1 billion in the Bybit attack. We have the organized crime category. Those are traditional criminals that are working to steal digital assets through joint cause and shared work. They steal data and funds, and one great example for that is the drainer as a service threat activity imposed by drainers. Those are draining wallets through compromising legitimate services or deploying phishing Web3 pages, trying to mimic benign Web3 operation, but actually stealing funds and secrets from users. We also have the opportunistic actors, those who manage to see the low-hanging fruit and try to seize it, whether it's by exploiting a vulnerability or just seeing something misconfigured and taking and abusing it. We have one of the most dangerous threats that sometimes go unnoticed, which is the malicious insiders. Those are employees, contractors, partners who work with institutions and companies and customers while trying to actually exploit their privileges in order to gain fund and access private information. In the next slide, we are able to see how Fireblocks approach both the different threat vectors which threat actors impose against our customers with a multi-layered security approach and controls. So I'll begin with the threat vectors. Those are the root causes or the ways that threat actors actually access the network or are able to initiate transactions or just manipulate the transactions on your behalf. Those could be secret compromise like private keys or API credentials, and they could relate to a network intrusion by a phishing attack or a vulnerability exploitation. At Fireblocks, we try to create a layered security system that helps customers that try to trade with DeFi through transaction scanning and threat detection, but also are covering everyone who needs some kind of a security control like a policy and governance engine, enabling you to control your specific transactions and actions with Fireblocks. We also try to minimize risk on areas that we can, like address poisoning attacks. While you whitelisting your addresses, you are not exposed to that risk. MPC wallet solutions are preventing you from being exposed to private key compromises. But in the next, what we see additionally to that in the next slide is that most of the security incidents out there, both happening to customers and around the globe, were technically authorized. What we mean by that is that the customer have used maybe some kind of security mechanisms or products that were offered to him, but misconfigurations or lacking controls enable the transaction to actually go through. That's why we made this layered security approach containing policies as a critical line of defense to enable you to stop transactions and actions you do not authorize. So that's it for now on my side, and I'm glad to introduce Matan Moyal.
Thank you, Ori. So following what we heard from Ori, let's talk a little bit about what are the capabilities and layers of security that we can provide in Fireblocks for you to make sure that you double down on security and you mitigate risk as much as possible. So obviously, we're not going to cover everything throughout this session today. So keep in mind that we have much more other layers of security that we provide. We will cover some of the crucial ones that we think can bring most of the value for you. So first of all, in terms of how we use Fireblocks, how our customers use Fireblocks. So definitely you can reach out and log into the Fireblocks UI and console and create transactions from there. What we do see is that the majority of our customers and the vast volume of our transactions are actually created when you develop on top of Fireblocks, meaning you, as a customer, create API requests or using our SDK to Fireblocks to create transactions and many more other activities. So first things first, when we talk about API and developing on top of Fireblocks, we want to talk about how we secure your API. So the first thing is obviously you have the private key, which you use to sign the API requests. And this API key obviously should be secure on your end. And the other aspect of it is to actually whitelist the IPs of your API, meaning which IP addresses we should expect, Fireblocks should expect to receive the API request from. And we will not allow any API request to be received from any other IP. So this is really to mitigate a situation where an attacker tried to compromise your API and send false API request. We will just block any API request that comes from a non-whitelisted address. So let's talk a little bit about the transaction flow and how we can make sure that we secure the transaction flow. So obviously, in a common setup, we have the end users that are interacting with your front end. It can be a web or application or whatnot. Then on the customer side, again, we have the backend and the database. And let's say that an end user wants to create a withdrawal. So this goes through that flow. Through the API, we create create transaction request. And then we have several components that are very crucial to take into consideration. One is what we call the whitelist addresses. This is where you can authorize and approve addresses that are frequently being used, and you are familiar with those addresses. So this is the safest way to actually interact and to send transactions to those addresses. And this is really, to mitigate human errors. You don't need to type in addresses, etc. So more than that, we have the Fireblocks network. So not only that we utilize the power of the ecosystem of other customers in Fireblocks, you can interact with other Fireblocks customers using the network. And again, it's an address agnostic, so you don't need to actually deal with actual addresses. We know that in reality, this cannot be utilized in all times. So meaning that sometimes you will need to actually have addresses that are not very frequently used, mainly for retail customers. And we'll touch base on that shortly. Another component is the transaction policy. The transaction policy is a crucial security layer and component that needs to be taken very, very seriously. Transaction policy essentially is a set of rules that governs and controls the transactions that are initiated from Fireblocks. So it means that according to who is the initiator, what is the type of the operation, what is the asset type, source, destination, etc., you can decide if you want to allow this transaction or to block or to maybe have some other entities or users to be able to approve this transaction before it gets signed. So this is the transaction policy. And let's talk a little bit about some best practices when we talk specifically about transaction policy with the API. First thing is we want to set specific policy rules for API users. Specifically, I mean when we have API users as initiators in the transaction policy, we don't want to mix them with initiators of console users, for example. This is because we want to relate to API transactions differently from console users. Second is a concept that we call amount accumulation. So not only that you can set a rule that says, okay, if there is a transaction that is being initiated from the API and it's above, let's say, $100K dollars worth of crypto, we want to maybe approve it. We can also say what happens if there are multiple small amount of transactions that accumulates to a certain amount. So as an example, if there is an accumulation of more than $1 million of transaction within 3 hours by the API, we want to also tackle this situation, this scenario. And this is where we have the amount accumulation. And the idea here is really to mitigate a situation of what we call draining attack, to mitigate a situation of, let's say, a malicious actor taking over the API and send multiple small transactions of $500, for example. It's under the radar, nobody notices it. This is where we want to catch it using the amount accumulation and sort of like safeguard this situation. Another very key important concept is to make sure that this amount accumulation rule is actually at the top. This is just to, as part of the nature of how the transaction policy works, which works from top to bottom. We want to make sure that this rule is being caught first. And obviously there is much more best practice that we can talk about when dealing with the transaction policy. So I urge you to go and look for article policy best practices in our help center. Let's move on. So let's talk about, again, more on the transaction flow security. So let's say that an end user send a request to withdraw funds. What we recommend you to do is to log this end user withdrawal request on your database internally. And then obviously you will create an API request to create a transaction and withdraw the funds from your withdrawal vault accounts. And I say withdrawal vault accounts because this is not a security really recommendation. It's more for scalability, to have multiple withdrawal vault accounts to keep just to maintain a scale for high throughput. From the withdrawal vault account, we can see that the transaction goes then to the API cosigner. The transaction goes to the API cosigner. A cosigner is a machine that holds 1/3 of the, or a key share of that belongs to the API user. And also here we recommend to have API cosigners, meaning to have what we call high availability mode. Again, this is for scalability purposes. So you can actually have multiple API users that are linked to different cosigner machines. So if one cosigner machine goes down, the other cosigner machine can still operate and sign transactions. So another very crucial component here is that to have the callback handler linked to the API cosigner. And a callback handler is essentially a piece of code that can run some checks internally and return a response to the API cosigner to provide a decision making of should I approve or sign this transaction, or should I decline or ignore it whatsoever. So let's see a little bit of, and just before, sorry. So the idea here is that the callback handler can go to the database and then run what we call like a cross validation with the withdrawal request of the end user. So this is how we run cross validation end to end, from the request of the end user and from the request of the API to create transaction. And this is just one use case out of many that you can utilize with the callback handler. For example, it can also be used to approve or to validate destination addresses of transactions without needing to whitelist them. If we're talking about, you know, end user addresses and wallets that are not predictable, will not necessarily know where the transaction should be or the withdrawal should be sent to. So again, callback handler is something that we really recommend you to be using. And let's see a little bit of how it works actually in the backend. Very simply put. So we have the cosigner gets the request for the transaction payload actually transferred to the callback handler, and then the callback handler again running this logic, the code, does the checks and can return a response to the API cosigner according to your logic. It can either be approved, which means approve the transaction, or sign the transaction depending on how you set your transaction policy, or it can actually reject, right? So if the validation doesn't make sense, it will just reject, and then the API will not sign this transaction. Obviously, we also have other responses like retry and ignore. For more information, I really urge you also to go ahead and look for callback handler in our developer portal for more information and code examples and much more than that. Last but not least, we want to talk about notification security. So within the entire transaction flow and many other activities that you run on Fireblocks, we have notifications that you can utilize using our webhook or push API. So you set a URL that you want to receive the webhook events to, and then we send you to the webhooks, and this can be used to notify the end user, to run an internal ledger and manage it, etc., etc. So a little bit about how to secure your webhook notification. One thing is that all the webhook events that we send to you are being signed. So on your end, you should do at least two things. One is to verify the signature of the webhook event. And second, to also have an IP allow list of where you expect to get webhook events from, and obviously only from Fireblocks IPs. This really mitigates a situation where a malicious actor somehow is able to send you webhooks, faulty webhooks, and this is the way to verify and to make sure that you get the right and legit webhook from Fireblocks. Last is about FSPM, Fireblocks Security Posture Management or Posture Model. And this is really, it wraps the entire operation of Fireblocks, not only what we covered, but actually gives you, in a streaming to you and giving you near real-time events about your setup, your workspace setup, security risks, gaps, and allows you to also manage those gaps in a very seamless manner. So this is something that we really recommend you to go ahead and explore and leverage. And I invite Slava to stage.
Matan, and hello everyone. Really excited to be here. So Hannah, can we move to the next slide, please? And I'll start from there. Awesome. Thank you so much. So yeah, after Ori and Matan walked you through kind of the threat landscape and the specific Fireblocks features that give you better security controls, I want to talk about the things that happen on your end. So these are the best practices for things that Fireblocks doesn't have any control over. I want to talk about things that are not product features, rather those are the decisions, configurations that live in your environment, your infrastructure, and basically those are your team's practices. Now, also what I'm about to cover is a very small subset of what we go through as part of the professional services security engagement with our clients. Basically, the professional services team works with clients on a wide range of security topics from day one of the engagement. And honestly, we could run like a full session on each and every one of these areas. So today I'm going to stay a high-level overview, hopefully informative, and to give you a taste of some of these topics in order to give you a sense of what good looks like. So I would like to start actually with the most fundamental piece, your API private key. Next slide, please. Yep. So API key management. So when you create an API using Fireblocks, you generate an RSA key pair, right? And the public key of that key pair is registered with Fireblocks, while the private key stays with you. Every single API request your system actually makes to us is signed with that private key, and that's how we verify that the request was made by you. And this is the authentication model, and it clearly means one thing. Whoever holds the private key controls the API user and controls the API access to your system. Now, of course, as Matan mentioned, you should introduce IP whitelisting to harden that, but eventually, at the basis of it, whoever holds the private key has the control to your system. And it's important to mention that there is no password reset that you can do. There is no two-factor authentication prompt that can save you if the key itself is mishandled. So I want to focus on two things today. Basically, where should we store those API keys or secrets, and what patterns or what are the things that we should avoid when we are working with those secrets. So where do we store those? Probably the right answer here is dedicated secrets manager. So any major cloud provider out there like AWS, GCP, Azure, they all provide some solutions. So we have the AWS Secrets Manager, we have the Azure Key Vault, we have the GCP Secret Manager, and all of these give you encryption at rest. But in addition to that, they also provide you with a fine-grained access control and access logging. So you basically know who retrieved the secret, when, from which service, etc. And that kind of auditability is as important as the encryption itself. Now, in more higher security environments and probably more regulated environments, you probably want to go one step further and use an HSM, hardware security model, where the key is physically sealed inside the device and the signing operation actually happens inside of it. So the private key never leaves the hardware boundaries. And in terms of kind of the standard, I think that this is kind of the gold standard for environments with highest asset values and or regulatory requirements. I would say that for most production environments, a well-configured secrets manager gets you to a very strong baseline, and usually that is the bare minimum that we recommend for any client going live. Now, not only previous slide, I have still, yep, thank you. So we talked about where to store it, what we want to actually avoid here. So those are actually patterns that we see in real production environments all the time. And usually those are there not because the teams are careless, it's because usually things move fast and these kind of shortcuts feel harmless at these specific moments, right? So for example, hard-coding the private key in the source code is the most common one. And it's crucial to understand that the moment that the code touches a repository, so you hard-coded the secret, you uploaded the code to a repository, even if it's a private repository, you have created a copy that exists in Git history, in CI logs, potentially in snapshots, and in any other components out there. And the key is no longer fully under your control. Similarly to that, also storing the key in a configuration file that lives alongside the application, or passing it in environment variables that get baked into a container image, or even sharing those via Slack or other messaging or communication channels you have with the teams during the onboarding flow. All of these create copies in places that you cannot fully audit or revoke. Now, I think that an important thing to mention here is that besides storing those keys in those insecure environments, you also need to make sure that you manage separate keys for different environments that you have. So staging, production, development environments should not have the same key pair or secrets shared across those. And that's because a misconfiguration in a development environment should never have any path to production. And I think that the mental kind of model that helps us here is your private key is not a password. It is a credential. It cannot be reset. It can be only rotated, and it kind of changes how seriously you need to treat where it lives. Now, I mentioned rotation. Let's talk about the rotation in the next slide, please. So API key rotation or any secret key rotation is a practice of periodically replacing your API key pair with a new one and creating a new and retiring or removing the old one. And a lot of the times that we work with clients, we see that a lot of teams treat rotation as a compliance checkbox. And it's crucial to understand that the real value of rotation is time bounding your exposure window. If a key was somehow exposed, let's say a month or a few months ago, and you even might not know it, rotation is actually the mechanism that closes that window, right? So it's not about preventing a compromise. It's not about preventing a control. It's about limiting how long any given credential remains valid. And you probably ask yourself how often I should do that. So unfortunately, there is no magic number or a formula that I can share with you here. But I think that the right cadence would be depending on the nature of your environment and the nature of the API access those credentials have, right? So a good rule of thumb would be to differentiate between standard environments and high value or high volume production environments, and to make sure that the latter or those sensitive kind of environments keys are getting rotated meaningfully more frequently. And when we talk about meaningfully more frequently, we're talking about the difference between thinking in quarters versus weeks. Now, in terms of the rotation, the process itself in Fireblocks is quite straightforward. You generate a new key pair in your secure environment that we just talked about, right? You register the new public key with Fireblocks. You basically update the transaction policies if those are involved in the policies, or you pair the cosigner again. And then basically you test everything end to end, revoke the old key, and log the rotation event in your audit trail. I would also strongly recommend to introduce some automation to it. So all of these major players, major cloud providers, all support programmatic rotation. And the goal here, and this is crucial, the goal here is that that rotation happens on a schedule basis, right? And it's auditable, and it does not depend on someone remembering it, putting that in his calendar, moving it later on, skipping it, or whatever it is, right? We want to make sure that this happens on a scheduled basis. And one more thing on that slide before we move on, and I'll do that briefly. Do not use the same API key for everything. I briefly mentioned that before, but you want to separate, right? The principle here is pretty simple. If one credential is compromised, you want the blast radius to be one function and not your entire operation. And that's why you probably want to separate API keys to different operations that you have in your system, such as read and write only. That's it on this one. Let's move to the cosigner. Awesome, thank you. So cosigner, I want to focus on cosigner high availability, talk briefly about the callback handler and its high availability, to add on top of Matan shared about the callback handler, and a bit about log monitoring. So the cosigner sits in the critical path of every automatic flow that you have, or every automatic transaction you sign. And how you deploy it matters a lot. So probably the first thing to understand here is that cosigners don't follow the typical high availability setups. You can just spin up. you can just spin up multiple instances behind the load balancer. It doesn't work that way, unfortunately. But each cosigner is paired to a dedicated API user, created solely for that pairing and used for nothing else. So the way you get resilience here is not through infrastructure routing, rather it's through how you design your user groups and tap or your transaction policies. And the way it works is pretty simple. You create one dedicated API user per cosigner instance. You group all of these users together in Fireblocks in one single group. And then you configure your policy so the designated signer is any one member of that group rather than a specific user. And then from that point, each instance runs independently. You can spread those instances across multiple cloud providers. We support all of them: AWS, Azure, GCP. You can even spin up on-premise cosigner. You can define that in different availability zones, different regions, whatever makes sense for you, basically. And if one goes down, the policy condition is still satisfied here by any other member of the group, and transactions basically keep flowing through the system without any manual intervention. A lot of you probably, or at least I was asked a lot from our clients, how many cosigners we should run in production. So there is no magic number. As a professional services team, we work together with our clients to understand their exact needs, their throughput requirements, the blockchains that they work with, their setups. And we analyze how many of these they should run, but the bare minimum is 2 instances in production in order to be highly available. Next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so callback handler was mentioned by Matan. I will briefly talk about the high availability of the callback handler and the cosigner logs here. So the callback handler sits next to the cosigner in the signing flow, right? We all understand that, but usually it gets less attention than it actually deserves. This is the place where your customization or your custom authorization or business logic runs. So it's on top of what Fireblocks provides you with. You can add any business or security logic of your own. And it's important to mention that if that part goes down, all the transaction will fail. So unlike the cosigner, the callback handler is a standard application service as any other service that you have on your backend. So you should treat it like one of these. So you should run multiple instances behind the load balancer across different availability zones. Make sure that you create those callback handlers stateless. And I think that one of the most important things to call out here is keep an eye on response latency. Those tends to spike before things actually break. Now on the cosigner logs, which kind of connects all of that together, is that the cosigner records everything that passes through the signing pipeline. Every request, every callback handler response, everything is there. Most of the team configure log shipping, check the box, and never look at them again unless something actually happens or goes wrong, right? So what we actually encourage our clients to do is to treat these logs as an active signal, right? You want to be watching for things like unexpected spikes in signing volume, off-hours activities, or a rising callback handler response times. So not discovering those at the right timing is problematic, right? You want to make sure that you actually stream those to your CM systems, to your audit system, to your logging system in real time. You build dashboards that make anomalies visually obvious for you. And you also should retain these logs for at least 6 to 12 months for different purposes that you might want to have. Last but not least, next slide, please. I would like to cover how everything that we talked about ties together and how basically the topics of key management, the cosigner architecture, the monitoring, the security features that Matan presented, the threat landscape, and all of the features that were presented by Ori, right? all of these are part of what we do with our clients when we are engaging as part of the professional services engagement. Each and every one of these in separate is not particularly complicated, basically on its own. But the hard part is to kind of how do you make sure that you're getting all of it right consistently and in the middle of a real implementation where priorities compete, timelines are tight, and everything is very stressed. So as part of the professional services engagement, we work with our clients. Our architects and engineers are in the room when the decisions are made. And we basically saw a lot of these setups, environments, and we have a pretty good or a pretty clear picture of how good looks like. So we are here, we know this stuff, and we are happy to help you get it right. I'm done. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much to all of our speakers. So now, next steps. What do you do with all this information? Our speakers just shared really rich guidance on how to fortify your setup. In light of the evolving threat landscape where you have, as Ori mentioned, highly motivated, sophisticated threat actors, nation-state groups, organized cybercrime, and obviously very valuable assets in the digital asset landscape, and increasingly changing techniques with AI. So in that light, we want to ensure as Fireblocks that we are constantly evolving our approach and providing you with multi-layered defenses, but also that you are equipped with the best guidance and the best practices to make sure your implementation is as secure as possible. So there are a few things that we want to leave you with that you can do next to make sure that you have the best setup possible. So first is request a health check. This is a free structured audit of your Fireblocks platform conducted by your customer success manager, Matan and his team. And it just ensures your workspace is secure, it's compliant and optimized for efficiency and growth. And you can see where you stand with regard to security in your workspace. So you can reach out to your CSM to book a health check, and you can get that done pretty quickly. So that's one thing you can do. If you want to go more in depth, you can explore a security workshop with our professional services team. That's Slava and his team. And he gave you a great preview of some of the things that you would really go through in detail in that kind of workshop. So it's a very structured, expert-led engagement, and it's designed to ensure your environment is hardened from day one. And the professional services engineers have really deep expertise across hundreds of client implementations, and they will translate platform capabilities into a concrete plan and architecture tailored to you and your setup and your business requirements. So I encourage you to explore this. And again, you can reach out to your CSM to explore this offering and learn more. Now, if you say, well, I really need something that's always on. I want to always know what is going on with security in my workspace. You can explore Fireblocks Security Posture Management, FSPM. Matan alluded to this as well, but this is an advanced security product, and it is actually the first security posture management tool that has been purpose-built for digital assets. So SPM tools exist in other areas of the tech stack, in cloud security and elsewhere, but this is the first one really dedicated and built for the digital asset space. And it acts like having an always-on security advisor built into your Fireblocks workspace. It is continuously monitoring your configurations and providing clear guidance on how you can fix those issues before they become incidents. And what we have found is that typical Fireblocks customers have hundreds of whitelisted addresses. You've got dozens of policy rules. You may be publishing new policies every other week. So, manually ensuring that you're maintaining and adhering to these best practices can become, can start to become challenging, and drift can occur. And when drift occurs, you're open to vulnerabilities and different threat vectors. So we encourage you to explore FSPM to have that always on, in your workspace built-in security advisor. And then finally, we've just recently published a deep dive security white paper that breaks down, it goes over the threat landscape that Ori mentioned, the different threat actors that are acting in the space now that are highly concerning, including nation states and organized crime and even opportunistic actors, as well as the common threat vectors that we see in the space very commonly. So you can learn more by reading that, but also it breaks down how Fireblocks defense in depth architecture is meant to protect against these threats, and how you can ensure that your setup is really hardened against these threats. And there's a nice handy security readiness checklist in that white paper that you can just go through to see, am I really following these best practices? And not to brag on Ori a little bit, but you can also learn more via our blog. And Ori and his team are constantly monitoring and disrupting sophisticated threat actor activity, and recently disrupted a scam linked to North Korean actors where they were impersonating recruiters that were scamming and targeting workers in the blockchain ecosystem. So we are constantly monitoring these threats and taking these best practices, updating what we know and updating the best practices that we share with you. So you'll be receiving some of these materials after the recording, after the session, the white paper and other resources that are available to you. So with that, there's a summary of all the things that you can do to fortify your setup.